Mark Kermode is in New Orleans. Richard Ayoade is here with me. He's the director of Submarine, which is out next week. Hello, Richard. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Yeah. How are you?
Okay, so how excited are you then, on a scale of 1 to 10, that your first movie that you've directed is about to be released?
I mean, within my own level of excitement, it's quite high, but to others that would seem a low level. I've kind of taken a policy decision against enjoyment quite early on.
You've taken a policy against enjoyment?
Yeah, I seem to have, and in a way it seems to be a kind of unconscious decision, but effectively I'm inconsolable.
Right, so it's going to be quite difficult to know whether you enjoy this interview or...
Yeah, I mean, I'm very inexpressive naturally and have very little to offer on a personal level.
Good, okay. Well, Mark, I think then it's down to you then to see if you can wheedle some excitement out of Richard.
I like the idea of anybody deciding to be inconsolable at the outset. I think, honestly, if more filmmakers decided to approach their work like that, things would be a lot better. So let's begin by the film's based on a novel, which I haven't read the novel, I have seen the film. Can you outline the story for us for those who don't know it?
Well, it's about a 15-year-old boy who has his first relationship and is quite a self-important, self-regarding young man. Yeah, I mean, it depends whether you feel sympathy to those kind of traits in someone of that age.
He doesn't.
Oh, right, okay. A barrage of furies about to be lobbed over this net. So, and he has this first relationship, and as a result, he's so puffed up with his own sense of himself that he thinks he can solve his parents' problems, which is that their marriage is under threat by a mystic ninja.
And obviously, in terms of the marriage, his mother is played by Sally Hawkins, who's fantastic, who is being somehow sort of seduced by Paddy Considine's horrendously haircutted, bogus philosopher. Tell us about them.
Yes, I mean, Sally's always very good, as is Paddy, and so it was just incredibly fortunate to get them. And Sally plays a very buttoned-up kind of character, someone whose probably style hero was someone from Howard's Way. And Paddy Considine is, effectively David Icke in leather trousers. I don't know whether that actually adds as a qualifier to David Icke. Maybe he is regularly in leather. Who knows?
And how did you find the two young cast members, our central character, who you describe as being introverted and self-obsessed, or me, essentially, right, and his paramour?
It was just a long audition process, and you just hope to find people who you feel you can watch for a long time. And just very lucky. They'd both started acting quite young, as it happened, and they'd been in TV things, but not in many films.
One of the things that I think is really great about the movie, and I like it very much, is very early on there's this monologue in which we're told by the central character that essentially he imagines his life as being a film, that he's being followed by a film crew. And he says, marvellously, he says, right now, for example, there'd be a crane shop, but we couldn't afford a crane, so you're just going to get something tracking away. And that idea of adolescence, the angst of adolescence being expressed as somehow believing yourself to be in a movie is something which I understand and identify with completely. Is that how you felt about? Because obviously this is based on a novel which you didn't write, but is that how you felt about your own childhood?
I mean, I think everyone has a level of self-consciousness that can be funneled through what you currently like, whether you decide to dress like Morrissey for a while, or as I did ill-advisedly try to have the same haircut as Robert Smith from The Cure, which...
was that a look that worked for you?
It did not work. My hair was unruly and could not be governed.
Did you do the lipstick on? You didn't do the full...
No, I didn't do the lipstick. I, in a way, for a while I went for a centre parting, which effectively just looked like I'd been cleaved in twain. And it was a difficult time, and it only ended very recently. So, yeah.
I mean, I think we're quite intrigued, Mark, by the thought that this might be you. And when I was watching this, I didn't think of Oliver Tate as you, but were you like that at 15?
No, I mean,
you thought your life was a movie?
Only in as much as I think that the central idea of the film is this idea of somebody narrating their own story and somebody seeing their own story is somehow being followed around by a film and it being part of a cinematic. I think there's an entire generation of people for whom that's true, actually, and I think it's particularly true of people who are into Morrissey and Robert Smith and The Cure and those other, navel-gazing, noodly, introverted, self-obsessed, it's all about me people. But I think what the film does beautifully is to capture that idea. I don't think there's anything abnormal or unnatural about that at all. I mean, obviously, Simon, you don't have any of that, but that's because you're incredibly well adjusted as a child, and you spent your childish time pretending to be a radio DJ.
Yes, when I wasn't pretending to be Peter from Germany.
And making sure you were fully insured at all times.
Yeah, and
well,
the health and safety
true.
aspects are a very big deal.
Can I ask you, Richard, when is this set?
Well, it's set in a sort of indeterminate past, really, because it didn't feel like it had to be anchored to one era for the logic of it to work. And in terms of the idea of people seeing themselves as though they're in a film, I think people always discuss matters in terms of films, or films often form the topic of discussion, or someone will compare something to this being a bit like that. And I think sometimes films can feel like a peculiar ghetto in which no films are ever discussed. And if they are, you're suddenly in some really postmodern territory, as though, isn't it completely insane that someone would possibly refer to a film in real life?
And did you find when you were making it that there were other films that you had as touchstones? Because one of the things I thought that they're completely different, and I don't think that stylistically they're similar at all. But I came out of Submarine feeling that it had a similar sense of authenticity as some of my favourite scenes in Gregory's Girl. Some of it reminded me of the scene in Gregory's Girl when they're lying down on the floor and they imagine that the floor turns up, so they're dancing, standing up. I don't really remember that sequence. But it was that very difficult thing about getting the edginess of adolescence right. And I did think that at its best that those two films were comparable. Do you see that as a compliment?
I mean, yeah, I like Gregory's Girl. I mean, it wasn't something that was particularly in my mind. And someone mentioned it when they read a script, actually, and so I watched it. And I think probably, there's something very charming about that film, and particularly about, his lead performance is just incredibly charming. So hopefully in that regard, you have a character who could be considered not terribly sympathetic, but I think Craig Roberts, the actor, has enough charm for you to hopefully follow him and enjoy seeing him.
You have to say Gregory
stumble.
is somewhat more delightful and charming than Oliver Tate.
Well, it depends, really. I mean, I think there can be something somewhat puppy-doggishly irritating about Gregory's enthusiasm, and I have very high sales resistance to any kind of enthusiasm, as I think I've set up at the start.
Yes.
So
anyone who's sort of intrinsically unenthusiastic, he's your kind of guy.
Well, I would always sooner go for Buster Keaton than Norman Wisdom. But that's me, I prefer a deadpan approach rather than someone cloyingly. I mean, this is seeming like it's turning into a rant against Wisdom, which is clearly not the place of any of us to do. But I do have a resistance to unearned enthusiasm.
I thought it was interesting that when I mentioned Gregory's Girl, that you essentially sounded like you were putting Gregory's Girl down by saying, yes, there were things about it that were charming, but you used the word charming in a fantastically negative way.
Yeah, I've got a really awful voice. It's terrible, I mean, getting a compliment from me is like getting a slap in the neck. I mean, it's terrible. I just have a very unappealing, monotonous, nasal, depressing voice. So there's nothing of joy contained in it. It's effectively just one of the worst things you could ever possibly hear.
And tell us something.
I can't even pronounce the word "here."
Tell us something joyous about Paddy Considine, because that is a really extraordinary performance. Leather-trousered, horrendously haircutted, and full of bow. Tell us about where that character came from.
Well, I mean, largely Paddy. I mean, Paddy's just naturally very funny, and the idea was to have a character who'd be a nemesis to this introverted boy, someone who'd be the complete opposite. And I suppose a David Icke-style guru, someone who has had a kind of crack-up. Who knows whether David Icke actually has found the truth, and we are the ones who are wrong, and perhaps that will be revealed later. But someone like that felt like a pleasing adversary to someone who was very logical and kind of, analysed and dissected everything.
And again, he seems to serve a similar position in the story as, for example, the Patrick Swayze character in Donnie Darko, that he's the person who everybody sort of falls. He's spouting all this philosophical baloney about colours and understanding the world in a certain way, but our central protagonist, who is profoundly misanthropic, sees right through him and hates him from the outset.
Yeah, I mean, I think often if you have a central character who is slightly strange, that by having a kind of constellation of more objectionable people around, I guess like in Catcher in the Rye, he will encounter a teacher who initially seems sympathetic but ends up being even worse and more self-regarding and more kind of blind than he is. The idea was that the adults actually, for all their initial normality, are actually far more strange than he is.
An email to Richard here from Peter Smith in Prague. Could you ask Richard, please, if he intends to get back in front of the camera? We need more IT crowd and more Moss. You have 30 seconds to sound enthusiastic and engaging and a little charming.
Okay. I'm not sure is the answer. It's up to Graham Linehan, the brilliant writer of it. I guess we'll decide how he feels about it.
Would you like there to be more?
If he would like to, yes. I'm sounding like a politician. I feel I'm under attack. What's going on?
So that's the most non-committal and unenthusiastic answer.
Possibly. You heard it here first.
I don't know about you, but I was engaged and charmed by that response.
Thank you very much.
Fair enough.
Mayo's very aggressive. I mean, his
he
hurling
is. You should try working with him.
I know. I mean, there's the fury buried under that benign. What
Richard,
can you do?
Thank you very much, Steve, for coming in.